What up, TCK Putters? Welcome back. This is episode 180 of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Podcast. We are super excited to be back in the place. I'm your host, Sky Guasco, per usual. My man, Daniel Stancato, back in the place. It has been a very long time. My hometown homie, BFF 4L, childhood compadre, grew up playing Little League. If y'all been listening to the podcast for quite a while, you know how we roll. And Daniel and I actually started the podcast. Man, it's going on 3 years ago already. I can't believe that. But Daniel's back in the place. It's been a long time coming. I was doing a little research, man. The last episode you were on was episode 110, 70 episodes ago, and that was back in late August, which means that we did not talk formally on the podcast the entire season for 2019. Completely unacceptable. Without any further ado, man, please fill everybody in on what the hell you've been doing this whole season.
Yeah, man. Sorry. Grad school intervened as it tends to. Grad school is now over. I'm a working stiff. So,
congratulations.
Yeah. So I will be back at least periodically, probably not weekly, but at least every so often to come and lend my moderate to potentially insightful skills to the fantasy podcast. Lots changed. I live in Oakland now, home of the Raiders. Home of the Warriors. Wait, no, sorry. None of those are true anymore.
Yikes. Home of Marshawn Lynch.
Home of Marshawn Lynch. We still have that.
There you go.
Anyway, yeah, man. So yeah, things are good. I'm really excited to be back. A lot to obviously recap for the season. Always fun to go over some of the things that we predicted before the season started. So yeah, let's get right into it, man. I'm stoked.
Absolutely, man. Super stoked. So what we're going to do is have one of the more fun episodes that you and I get to do every year. Of course, previously, before the season, before Lucas jumped on full-time and kind of took your position as the everyday co-host of the podcast, you and I go through and do our predictions for everything. We do our sleepers, our busts, breakouts, bounce backs, gamers, players we won't draft, and then we go through bold predictions and crazy calls. And we weren't able to do it around the Super Bowl time. Of course, you were finishing up grad school. I want to be respectful of that time. But now we're getting into 2020's predictions all of a sudden. We've got the NFL Combine wrapping up. We've got the NFL Draft around the corner all of a sudden. We've got free agency full swing. We've got trades coming on. It's a year-round sport all of a sudden, man. So we're going to jump into it today. We're going to recap 2019's predictions of our sleepers, our busts, our breakouts, and our bounce backs. Of course, you can listen to previous episodes. Like I said, that's episodes 107, 8, 9, and 10 if you'd like to double way back, but that's last year, so you probably don't want to do that. But let's get into it, man. Let's get right into it. Let's go with our sleepers from last year. You and I each picked a player per position, and we've kind of made a grade on if that was a good pick or a bad pick and why. And with the sleepers specifically, we made sure that these were players at the time, again, coming into 2019, these players are getting drafted with an ADP of at least round 10 or later, right? That's what deemed them a sleeper for us. At the quarterback position, I went with Dak Prescott, getting drafted as about the QB 13 last year, finishes the QB 3, of course, absolutely crushed. My point right away was that once Amari Cooper came over from Oakland last year, Dak Prescott was a top 6 quarterback the rest of the way. He was even better than that this year. They're going to re-sign him. They're going to re-sign Amari Cooper, I think. The Cowboys are in full swing. They should be just fine. I think Dak is going to repeat again as a top 5 for sure if he stays healthy, and potentially a top 3 quarterback once again for the Cowboys, and I will be looking for him everywhere I can possibly get him as a later round quarterback. On your side, you went with one of the young bucks, man. Why don't you bring us to your last year sleeper and how he did in 2019?
Yeah, I'm excited to start off with a win. I went with Josh Allen, and I took in our league of record. I think I took him in the, I want to say 15th round, and he finished as QB number 6. So I'll go ahead and take that. Just similar.
That's a win.
So yeah, despite his performance in his first ever playoff game, in which he totally looked like kind of a deer in the headlights, at least in the second half. That is not important for fantasy. Ultimately, he had a really strong sophomore year. One thing I said at the beginning of last year, which I stick with, is look out for sophomore quarterbacks, right? Teams are investing a lot into developing these young quarterbacks. I think definitely looking for guys heading into their second year. We saw it with, obviously, most extremely with Lamar Jackson, but Josh Allen as well, making huge strides. One of the main things with Josh Allen that I think people were concerned about was his accuracy, because he has a cannon for an arm, but he wasn't particularly accurate as a rookie, but he upped his completion percentage from like 53% to 59% through 20 touchdowns, only 9 picks, 9 touchdowns on the ground. He really is a dual threat. So I think his arrow remains pointing upward. I think for him as a player in real life, getting more consistency in the playoffs and being able to deal with that type of pressure is going to be huge. But for fantasy, I'm definitely all in again going into next season.
I love it, man. You hit the nail on the head there with the sophomore quarterbacks. You did make that not even prediction, just mention last year when we were doing these about the sophomore quarterbacks. Again, Mahomes is kind of weird because he straight up sat out his rookie season, but he was one for sure. Baker had slumps this year, but Sam Darnold, when he was healthy, was another one. And let's not, obviously, I think Kyler Murray, is a perfect example of coming into year 2. He's pretty set to explode if they can get some work around him. So we hit both of those, man. I mean, 2 sleepers right there, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen. We nailed both of those. Going down the list here, we'll kind of mention again, if we nailed it, not so much, pretty close. We'll see what happens. Let's get to the running backs, man. I'll let you kick this one off here.
Sure.
For the running backs, this was a tough one for you. But again, this is less about were you right and were you wrong. And we did this last year of 2018 coming back. And something that you and I really enjoyed about this and wanted to do again was less about patting ourselves on the back or thinking that we made a bad call. This is a processing wraparound, right? So like you picked Josh Allen for a certain reason, and whether he busted or did well, you had a reason behind that. This running back busted hard. But again, you had your reasons coming in, and that's why. So let's talk about your running back sleeper. Again, round 10 or later, who did you have?
Yep. So my sleeper was Ito Smith. I feel like that's like saying like I'm Daniel and I'm an alcoholic. I'm Daniel and I picked Ito Smith as my sleeper. I stand by my thinking. Look, I identified a team where I did not have a lot of confidence in their starting running back. Devontae Freeman coming off a bunch of serious injury issues. I was not confident on him staying healthy the whole year or potentially not even being overly effective when he was on the field. And Ito Smith, at least at that time, seemed like the clear number 2, potentially poised to have a pretty big impact in that offense, in a relatively high-powered offense. What I neglected to take into account, though, is the fact that Ito Smith, as it turns out, isn't actually very good. So that's for starters. And then he wasn't particularly good when he was on the field, and then he got hurt, ended up on IR, and that was clearly the end of that. I don't know certainly I won't be targeting him at all in fantasy. It's not clear that he's going to be even the Falcons' number 2 running back next year, even if they do cut bait with Devontae Freeman. So he's definitely somebody that I think you can leave off your radar for this upcoming season. But the thinking, I think I still stand with is just look for situations where you have a starting running back coming off of serious injuries or in general having concerns about age or performance and look at who the number 2 is and start to sort of think about those types of handcuffs is a good rule of thumb for fantasy. I just flat out missed in this case.
100%, and it happens, man. And again, you did have the right method of thinking. It just didn't work out. Ito Smith did finish overall running back 82. Not going to get it done. My pick was Devin Singletary. Finished up as running back 29 for the Buffalo Bills. We're going to go over our bold predictions and crazy calls, which were super fun, on the next episode on Thursday. But this, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into Devin Singletary then, so I'll kind of say my take overall on stats and everything else. Basically, it was Shady McCoy had left. I thought that he was going to come on. Frank Gore had come in, but I figured, you and I are both, Frank Gore truthers forever for the OG shitty 49er games. He gave us a reason to watch the games there for a long time. But really, it was the opportunity that Devin Singletary was going to have coming in, and I thought that he would maybe take over that backfield in the second half of the season and produce. He certainly did. So really just in about a half of a season, he was almost an RB2. I like Devin Singletary a lot again in 2019, actually, in this offense. It should be a little more high-powered. So Devin Singletary was an almost, I think he would qualify maybe as a sleeper, finishing at 29 where he was getting drafted late. But I think he's a dynasty buy for sure, and I look forward to getting value again from him this year because they might bring somebody else in. Frank Gore could stay, whatever. Either way, I think Devin Singletary will have value again in 2020. Let's move on to our wide receivers. Yep, I'm gonna dish off to you again here. This was one of your better picks, really, of all of our picks here, and I threw mad shade on you for this, and you stuck to your guns, and I appreciate that. So I'll let you kick off the wide receiver here.
Thank you so much. I am tremendously proud of this one. So my wide receiver, this is probably my favorite thing in the whole thing. So my wide receiver pick for sleeper was Devontae Parker. For the first part of the year, it looked like it was gonna, end up being, what we've seen thus far from Devontae Parker. And then he just absolutely exploded, particularly in the second half, and showed, he's always been an athletic freak. Just like he's always had the physical tools, had some issues with injuries, completely dog shit quarterback play to deal with, and not that I think that Ryan Fitzpatrick is anything special as a quarterback really, but he does let it fly.
He can chuck it.
he is good for receivers. He's confirmed that he is going to be back with them next year. It's probably going to be a really perfect bridge to.
I got my Fitzmagic rally beard starting already.
Well, I hope, and for Devontae Parker's sake, I hope it's true, because I think he's going to be, he'll keep it going for Devontae next year as a bridge to, like I said, I assume Tua. But yeah, I just think, finally able to capitalize on those physical gifts. What he was doing in the back part of the year, and I'm my biggest source of pride for Devontae Parker not only is this sleeper pick, but the fact that I just scooped him up off the waiver wire in our dynasty league, and now I got him all to myself. So I'm pretty thrilled about that in general. I'm glad that this finally came. I kind of said that this was the last year I was going to ride or die with Devontae Parker. I was in on him the year before, didn't work out, and it finally paid off.
Yeah, it's a great call, man. Again, he finished wide receiver 13, and honestly, just because Devontae Parker's been such a pain in everyone's roster for the last couple of years with injuries, and you're right, unstable quarterback play, blah, blah, blah. I didn't even think about him the entire season. I saw him having pretty good games. But to go back through this and realize that he was the wide receiver 13, I didn't even know he was in the top 30, to be perfectly honest with you, man. Like,
wide receiver 1, I know, it's crazy, right?
Very impressive. So Devontae Parker, that's a hit for you. Well done. On the other side, not so much. A lot of this had to do with injuries again, and basically my whole take was Anthony Miller was my wide receiver sleeper in the 10th round. I think it was a lot of people's sleeper. And my whole take was if he stays healthy, this should be a lock. Didn't stay healthy. When he's on the field, he's a beast. Didn't happen. Turns out Mitch Trubisky, I'm going to go into him in a little bit as well. Kind of a busted call on that one as well. But unfortunately, I thought the Bears were going to take a big step forward overall in their offense. Not quite yet. Didn't quite click with Nagy as quickly as I thought. So Miller unfortunately fell by the wayside. On the other side, though, Allen Robinson had a great season. So it can happen in Chicago. But I'm worried about Anthony Miller, all of these injuries. I think he's a great talent when he's healthy. Unfortunately, he's just not very often. So wide receiver 54 for Anthony Miller there on a miss.
Yeah, I'm willing to give him one more shot next year to make it happen. I think if hopefully Chicago manages to fix to some extent what's wrong with Trubisky, perhaps bring in a veteran to push him a little bit, and Anthony Miller was pretty baller in the last 6 games of the season. He averaged 72 yards a game in their last 6 games. So he did come after, he started slow, largely stemming from the fact that he had an off-season injury. But again, you run into the same issue now. He's undergoing shoulder surgery again this offseason. So you could be in for a situation where you might have to hang with him a little bit. But I still think the talent's there. I still think, wide receivers can succeed in Chicago. So I'm potentially thinking about, taking a run at him one more time and seeing how it goes.
Yeah, and I think a big issue, too, is so many of these Devontae Parker's one of them. So many of these players, though, you just kind of oh, he got hurt, give him another chance. He got hurt, give him another chance. Well, after a while, dude, that's just what they do. We're going to talk about Will Fuller and the bold prediction crazy calls for you.
Jordan Reed, too.
There's a lot of them. A lot of them.
Yeah.
Devontae Parker turned the corner. He made it happen. I think Anthony Miller possibly could as well because he did come out so strong last year and then again at the end of this year. But he's just got to string it together for a full season. I really think he could be a great compliment there. But I just don't think Mitch Trubisky is that good, unfortunately. He's fine for fantasy because he runs the ball. We all know how that works.
Right.
But NFL quarterback-wise, I just don't think he's going to be enough there. So those are our wide receivers, Devontae Parker and Anthony Miller. And I'm going to go first on this one with my boy Ark Mandrews getting it done. Tight end number 3 on the season. Mark Andrews, super nice. I want to, again, every time I bring up Mark Andrews, probably for the end, until the end of this podcast, I'm going to bring up my man Summy of the Draft Room podcast. I had him on way back early summer last year. I was doing the draft for tight ends. We were doing our predictions. I brought him on to do a collab, and he was the only one of anybody in the industry talking about Mark Andrews, and he had him as his number 7 tight end. And I had him at like 15, and I thought I was kind of like high on him. After talking to Summy, I moved him to like 12 and then like 10, and I just couldn't move him any higher than that preseason. But sure enough, tight end number 3 here. So Mark Andrews, we all saw what he did, man. Breakout season. Honestly, I don't expect anything less in 2020.
He's probably tight end number 4 maybe behind the big 3.
Totally, and I think you can still get value on him because Kittle and Kelsey are going to go in the first, second, third round depending on your drafts. Yeah. Ertz is still going to go up there. People still have hope that Ingram and Henry can still get it done, and then of course now you've got Andrews in the mix as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where he actually falls with ADP. But if I was picking OJ Howard, I was picking OJ Howard in like the 4th, 5th round everywhere I could get him because he was the best value preseason last year. Yeah. I think Mark Andrews is that guy for me again this year. We'll see what happens, but it's the offense for the Ravens. I don't see. Mark Andrews went down a little bit. Hayden Hurst came in immediately, scored like a 60-yard touchdown. We saw, multiple weapons in that offense, short range, and we know what Lamar Jackson can open up for everybody. So I do like Mark Andrews a lot. I definitely hit this one on the head, of course, but I want to give the credit to my man Summy at the Draft Room podcast. Make sure you go check him out for sure. Daniel, I'll turn it over to you for your tight end sleeper.
Yeah, less successful. So I went with Noah Fant. Just in general, this year, I was really big on the 2 kind of rookie tight ends, the big rookie tight ends that were coming out of college, and really neither of them did a whole lot. So I think it's a good lesson to be a little leery of rookie tight ends, which was the prevailing wisdom, and I kind of gave a big fuck you to that, and I kind of am eating it a little bit now. I still think Noah Fant's super talented. He's almost undoubtedly going to go up next year. His stock is going to go up next year. What do you finish? Tight end 17, I think.
Correct. Yep.
And even that's like he half of his yards came in 2 games. So really, in some sense, you could like take that even lower in terms of his consistency over the course of the year. But the bottom line is that the Broncos don't have a whole lot in terms of receiving talent behind Courtland Sutton. So his target share is almost a lock to go up. The problem is we don't really know what to expect out of Drew Lock. Pat Shurmur offense, he's going to ground and pound. So there's a lot up in the air in terms of what his ceiling can be. I do think he's almost a certainty to improve on what he did this past year, but I'm hesitant to just go totally all in on him going forward, at least not right now until I can see a little bit more about what Drew Lock has to offer as a quarterback in that offense. Totally.
And again, 2 points here. So you did go kind of go all in on your predictions with Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson, both the rookie tight ends. I think both were good calls. They both had injury concerns. They both had lackluster quarterback play once Stafford went down and Flacco, and they didn't know what was happening. So they didn't have the chips fall right for him anyway. When they were on the field, I think they actually did pretty well. So I wouldn't be too hard on yourself on the pick overall. I think it was just kind of maybe it didn't work out. That said, Lucas, of course, he's the house Bronco fan on the podcast here, and he's actually somewhat excited about the Shurmur grab. Not that it's fireworks, but he is a ground and pounder. But we did see with Sterling Shepard in New York that if anything, he's going to throw a couple bombs down the field, but he's also going to run those slants over the middle. And one thing that we're seeing from tight end, who is not, when you and I grew up, tight end like Brent Jones was like the only athletic tight end growing up, until Gronk and these guys came around. Now everybody is just a huge receiver. So I think if they turn these guys loose a little bit, I think it could definitely work out. So a little bit, kind of an almost there on that call, but I'm excited about Noah Fant actually in 2020 there. And I actually do believe in Drew Lock, and Uncle Flacco's, he gone. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah, that wraps up our sleepers, man. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight ends. I went with Dak, Singletary, Anthony Miller, and Mark Andrews. Daniel, one more time, who are your picks for your sleepers?
My picks for my sleepers were Josh Allen, Ito Smith, Devontae Parker, and Noah Fant.
Let's dive into the busts. So these were guys that, of course, had a high ADP. Daniel and I weren't buying it for whatever reason at our respective positions. We thought that they would underimprove or underperform, I guess, at that ADP. I'll kick it right off here. I went with Cam Newton. This one seemed easy to me, and then when it happened, I made a post on Instagram of his injury just to alert people and stuff, and I was like, hey, I kind of saw this coming. I can't predict injuries, but, dude's fucking hurt, came back too early, can't throw the ball anyway, doesn't run anymore. It's a problem. Holy shit, bro. I got, jumped on Instagram. It was rough. Really? Oh, yeah. I had all sorts of people, talking shit. Well, the whole thing because, it's Cam Newton and it's the Panthers. They do this every year. The whole thing was, he'll be out a couple weeks. He'll be back after the bye. He'll be back at the end of the season. If they make the playoffs, he'll come back. So it was this false hope all season. I was like, dude's toast. His shoulder's already gone, and he tried and he got hurt. Anyway,
right.
QB 50, obviously, not getting it done. But unfortunately, people were drafting him super high. I wouldn't say super high, but in the middle rounds as your QB1, dude, that's a killer on your roster if you didn't accidentally scoop Lamar Jackson or somebody in the 14th round or whatever. So Cam Newton seemed like an easy one for me, and that was low-hanging fruit. On the other side, you had a tricky one, man, that actually I think worked out-ish for sake of argument, but This was a tough one. Who was your quarterback bust?
My quarterback was Drew Brees. And, my thinking on this was, people are drafting him like he's still Drew Brees, in many respects. And I just, obviously he's, was entering his 40s in an offense that was almost undoubtedly, I was projecting to feature the run game more heavily with obviously Kamara and Latavius Murray being brought in as well. I just thought that he wasn't going to fly. Obviously he's still one of the most accurate quarterbacks on the face of the earth. One of the most accurate quarterbacks ever.
Love Drew Brees.
And I knew that he could still do that, but I just, quite frankly, I was just I don't think he's going to throw as much. But ultimately he still, put up okay value. And he still remains one of the most accurate quarterbacks. What is 75%, 70, something around 75% completion rate, which is insane. In terms of what to think about him going into this upcoming year, I don't know. It's really tricky. He's he's still certainly a useful fantasy player. He's good to have around. I think, you could draft players with a lot more upside, but if he falls far enough, I wouldn't be averse to taking a flyer on him, especially if you take somebody above him with maybe a tad more risk, like a Kyler Murray or, somebody along those lines. You could sort of back him up with Drew Brees, who's reasonably likely to be consistent, if maybe not have the same ceiling that he once did. In terms of calling him a bust for last year, I'll just kind of say so-so in terms of success. I don't know if I'd say it was a bust. I don't think he was quite worth his ADP, but it wasn't a Cam Newton level colossal disaster.
And if he didn't get hurt for 5 games, there's no way he's quarterback 24.
Right. Quarterback 24. Yeah,
he's just not. So
that's obviously.
So for sake of argument, where he actually finished the season, to call him a bust where he was getting drafted, we'll give it to you. Because he's usually top 10 every year. He's top, he's 24 now. But again, if he doesn't miss 5 games, he's probably a QB1. I agree with you, man. First of all, he's got to go back to the Saints, which I think we all assume will happen. But we don't know, man. We don't know. Tom Brady's on the market. We never thought that would happen. So we'll see what happens there. But I like Drew Brees. I think he's a perfect guy in early drafts. If you go Lamar Jackson or Mahomes in your second round or something like that, I would love me some Drew Brees in the 9th on accident, bye week at least, an injury. Dude, and some of these players, man, you draft them to play defense. Straight up. Right. I'd rather have Drew Brees and go for an average game at worst, because he's never going to lose you a game. That's the biggest thing, I think.
Yep, 100%.
Cool. Let's dive into the running backs. I'll let you kick this one off. Running backs here. Man, these were both tricky names coming in too, but I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, this is another kind of. So I noticed in our little spreadsheet you gave this a thorough green for Lev Bell. My running back pick for bust was Lev Bell. He finished as running back 15, so I guess compared to where he was drafted, I guess that's definitely a win on my part. It's an interesting I mean, he wasn't good. I mean, by any metric, he wasn't good. He averaged 3.2 yards per carry. He's sort of shown that he could sort of still fall into the end zone on occasion. Yeah.
One touchdown receiving.
One touchdown receiving, only 4 touchdown rushing. Yeah, man. I mean, he looked awful. And granted, he was running behind a absolute dog shit offensive line in New York. In a scheme that didn't. I mean, Adam Gase never really wanted him in the first place. So
I'm not train wreck.
I'm not ready to go ahead and say that Lev Bell has no utility in the NFL anymore. But it's definitely a bad situation there in New York. I mean, he's untradeable essentially. Flat out cutting him would provide no relief to their salary cap. The way the contract is, and so there's really nothing that's going to happen. He's going to be. I mean, he's still obviously somebody to eye as a mid-range running back 2, I think, in fantasy, just by sheer virtue of the fact that he's going to be their starting running back unless something drastic happens, and they don't exactly have a whole lot else to draw on. So he's going to get opportunity, but yeah, he's just a horrible fit over there. That contract is definitely fuels the fire of, unfortunately, why these running backs aren't going to get big contracts anymore, which means you're going to see more of them do what Melvin Gordon did and hold out. Because it's just these big running back contracts don't end well for the teams, unfortunately. And it's a bad situation because, the players are going out there getting hammered, putting up incredible numbers, and then not getting contracts because the teams know that it's not going to pay dividends. So it's a really weird situation. Unfortunately, the Lev Bell situation just adds fuel to that fire.
100%. My biggest thing with the Le'Veon Bell, I've talked about Le'Veon Bell so many times on this podcast. People that are listening consistently don't want to hear me go into it again, so I won't. But I will say, just to your point, I think the reason he looked so bad was because the offensive line was bad. And I mentioned that. And they had brought in some new guys, and they were getting healthy. My problem was during my research preseason, when I said I don't want Le'Veon Bell at all anywhere, was that he was going to get blown up in the backfield. And the reason he was so successful behind a great offensive line in Pittsburgh was because he could dance around and wait for a hole, hit it with great explosion and acceleration, and then boom, he's open for 6 yards and you can't catch him. Yeah. Awesome. Almost any running back could do that. The problem is when you're getting blown up right away and you're not hitting the hole like a Zeke Elliott or a Derrick Henry, you're going to get stuffed. And then you're going backwards most of the time. The offense was in a rut once Sam Darnold went down, yada, yada. The Jets were hurting. So I did put it in green because he was getting drafted, in the first couple of rounds. So technically I'll give it to you. But, yeah, it was a tough one. Mine was Philip Lindsay. He actually did a lot better than I thought he was going to. And I'm going to read off some of the stats right now because I found it pretty incredible that he was like almost identical to last year's season, which I just didn't think he was going to repeat. He finished as the running back 18 on the season. I'm going to just kind of look away here at my notes. But let's see. So he played one more game in 2019. He had 224 attempts, 1,011 yards rushing, and 7 touchdowns, 2 less. In the receiving game, he had the same amount of receiving receptions in 35, one more target in 48, and 196 yards compared to 241 in 2018. So his numbers were almost identical to his rookie season where he really broke out. Now, I'm not shy that I'm a Duck Homer on the podcast, big Royce Freeman fanboy for show. I still think Royce Freeman's just as good and should get the ability. The reality is, though, Philip Lindsay's outperformed him. And as long as that's going to happen, he's going to get the work. So Philip Lindsay impressed me, and I'm still not crazy about him, so he's not on my draft radar personally yet, but much more respect than I had coming into last year. So I for the sake of a bust, he was kind of where I thought he was going to be. I had him drafted as like RB 26, I think, coming in. He finished 18, so he outperformed where I thought he was going to be. So he kind of did me wrong there. I think I'm a little more impressed than I was last year to Philip Lindsay.
Yeah, I like Philip Lindsay. I think he's somebody that you could draft. As like an RB2 or 3 with somebody with a relatively high floor, because like you said, I mean, there's no reason why he's going to cede snaps to Royce Freeman while he continues to be consistent. And I don't think he has the ceiling of some of the other players that you might be taking a look at around that same period. But But if you're risk averse, I think you could do a lot worse than Philip Lindsay for sure.
Fair.
So I already did running back. We're moving on to receiver now, right?
Jump in.
Do you want to take it or do you want me to go?
No, go for it because mine's embarrassing.
Yours is an interesting one, actually, going into next year. I'm actually interested to talk about it. But so mine was sort of an interesting one as well. So I chose Adam Thielen. And I kind of felt this way about pretty much all of the Vikings receivers going into last year, where I just felt, it was clear that the Minnesota offense was all ground and pound. The possibility of a healthy Dalvin Cook, adding more fuel to that fire. And I just didn't think that, quite frankly, there was going to be enough target share for really anybody to eat that much. Adam Thielen, ultimately, really, his biggest issue was he got hurt. I mean, he missed 6 games with a hamstring issue. He really slumped in not just injuries, but in general slumped in pretty much every meaningful statistical category except for touchdowns. He did manage to get in the end zone a decent amount. His outlook going into next year, I mean, he's still shown that he can play at a high level. I think there's reason, if he can be healthy, to expect a bounce back in 2020. Kirk Cousins did also have a pretty nice year, actually. But there's a lot of limiting factors as well. First of all, he's going on 30 and coming off of a season in which he missed 6 games with a soft tissue injury, which is never good. Also, the continued progression of an improvement of Stephon Diggs is going to cut into him a bit. And of course, Dalvin Cook proved that he, at least in the first
Beast
of the year, that he can be a monstrous workhorse. And then also, of course, Alex Madison waiting in the wings to be ridiculous. So, there's a lot working against him, but I think, you could do worse as a wide receiver too than Adam Thielen, at least in terms of his relatively high floor, as long as he's out there. But given his age and the fact that he's coming off of a significant hamstring issue, he does give me a little bit of pause.
Totally. Wide receiver 59, Adam Thielen. I was kind of fading him as well. I wasn't think it was going to be a bust per se, but he did fade out, obviously. The Vikings and the Chargers, I'm going to get in my Chargers thing here in a second. The Vikings and the Chargers, I think, are very interesting wide receiving cores right now, with Stephon Diggs wanting out of Minnesota. A lot of that shit. He wants to be the number one. Thielen, I think, is the number one as of right now. Kevin Stefanski taking over in Cleveland, so he's out. Are they going to go back to more passing? Are they going to still run the ball significantly? There's a lot of questions there in Minnesota, but I'm with you, man. Dalvin Cook, as long as he's healthy, ride the train. Alexander Madison is basically out, Dalvin Cook as well. And what's so cool, if you look at them side by side, they both got the dreads, similar number, like they look like the same exact player when they're running. So I like the Vikings a lot. But Thielen, number 59, wide receiver, did get hurt for those 6 games, so should be bouncing back. Mine's pretty ridiculous, and actually I'll just turn it over to you quick because you seem to have more of a thought on this than I do. Basically, so I picked Keenan Allen to bust, which obviously is ridiculous. He finished wide receiver 8. Yep. My whole thing, and if you listened early in the season, and I might have the same take again this year depending on the quarterback, my whole thing was that I just felt that Mike Williams was going to become the alpha dog. He didn't. He scored 10 touchdowns 2 years ago, came back, scored 1 this year. He just couldn't. He did actually stay healthy, but it wasn't getting it done. Phillip Rivers' arm is toast, so he wasn't able to get him as many bombs as I thought. It just didn't work out. So not much to say. Keenan Allen's a beast. I don't dislike Keenan Allen at all. I just thought he was going to fade a little bit to Mike Williams. Obviously, that didn't happen. What's your take?
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, he put up in total over the course of the year, he, like you said, wide receiver 8. You can't call that a bust. But it was, he didn't have a 100-yard receiving game after week 3. He was insane through the first 3 weeks, basically.
Always is. Including
that week 3 when he almost had, just short of 200 yards, I think, receiving and 2 touchdowns. After that, he was fairly pedestrian. Part of that can be attributed, of course, to Phillip Rivers taking a pretty significant decline last year. He's an interesting case going into next year. We'll just have to sort of see what happens. There's so many players hitting free agency on their team. It's sort of a wait and see approach going forward to see what we're gonna get or what we can expect, I guess, from him next year. But I will say, he's become one of the most reliable slot wideouts in the league. His floor is super high. He's wherever whatever happens to him, he's going to very clearly going to be the number one option. So you can do a lot worse in maybe the third or fourth round, I think, in drafts next year. From my personal level, I'm glad you were wrong, because I always got to show love for my Cal Bears. So
Bears.
I'm a big Keenan Allen fan. But yeah, it's this is in terms of going into next year, it's definitely a wait and see approach to see what happens in LA with the Chargers, because there's just so many pieces that might be moving out. So we'll see. Do you know Keenan Allen is only 27 years old?
I know. Yes, I do.
Think of Keenan Allen as being like 32 or something.
Well, it's because he went bald in fourth grade. And I think once that happens, it's hard to
over.
So anyway, shouts to the Bears. Bears Ducks all day. Anyway, let's move on to the tight ends. Evan Ingram, tight end 18. Same old there, Evan Ingram. If he's on the field, he's beasting.
Yep.
He's not often on the field. He is a guy that I'm probably going to have in my top 10 tight ends and rankings. Once I actually get that out after the draft, I'll drop my first rankings. But again, fool me once, fool me twice.
Yep.
We're going on a third year here, man. I get a little bit worried about that. I gave guys like Hunter Henry, Evan Ingram, some of these guys props just because maybe they won't get hurt this year.
Yep.
Got hurt, it's a big problem. So Evan Ingram definitely busted. Now, when he was on the field, so points per game, he was just fine and you were thrilled. Unfortunately, he didn't have any consistency. Obviously, we're looking for that in fantasy football, especially at a onesie position, we call them, with the tight end, where you're only playing one tight end. If your stud tight end is out, you're waiver wiring it, and it's super shot in the dark there. So, unfortunately, Evan Ingram let down again. On the other side, though, my man, the seasoned veteran, came through for you.
Yeah, man, Jared Cook. And let me just say, Evan Ingram, just as a brief update for you listeners, he had Liz Frank surgery. He's still in a walking boot. He's been over 2 months since he went under the knife. He's missed 13 games over the past 2 years. He scares the crap out of me, man. I still think the talent's there. The opportunity could theoretically be there, especially now with Daniel Jones taking over, who has, I think we can safely say, has just a tad more upside than Eli Manning did at the end of his career. But yeah, he's just give me the heebie-jeebies for sure. Even at the tight end position, which is thin. So yeah, he scares me. Jared Cook, I was, you put this, I think graciously put this in yellow, which is sort of I kind of was missed a little bit. He finished as tight end 7, man, and tight end is a weak position in general. He did pretty well. He set career high marks in touchdowns, career high marks in yards per reception. He's going to very clearly be, an option in this, at least traditionally high-scoring offense. He's definitely somebody I think you can look at again in the middle rounds for tight end if you miss on one of the top guys. I just kind of thought, Jared Cook has had some success in the past, but ultimately has been very sporadic over the course of his career, kind of only succeeded in certain schemes and certain offenses. I just didn't think there would be enough to go around in the Saints offense with Drew Brees getting older, the rise of the running game over there with Kamara and Latavius Murray. And I was wrong. He fit in well. Ultimately, he had a pretty fine season. So I'll be higher on him this upcoming year than I was this past year for sure. He is 30, but again, I think he's shown that he still has plenty left. And
of course, when a receiver like Michael Thomas is catching as many balls as 2 receivers on most other teams, there's not a lot to go around. However, they got it done. And again, Jared Cook scores touchdowns. We all know if a tight end scores touchdowns, they climb that ladder very, very quickly. Good. That does it for our bus. I had Cam Newton, Phillip Lindsay, Keenan Allen, Evan Ingram. Who did you have?
Drew Brees, Lev Bell, Adam Thielen, Jared Cook.
2 more categories, breakouts and bounce backs. Let's get through this. Quarterback, I had Mitch Trubisky. Not much to talk about here. QB 25. I really thought the Bears were going to take that next step, including him, David Montgomery, Allen Robinson, who we already talked about, obviously Anthony Miller, who's in another category later on. Just didn't work out. I'm willing to give the Bears another chance. I think Mitch Trubisky's they're going to give him 1 more year because they just don't have another option right now. I think he's out next year straight up, whether he's benched or let go or traded, whatever. If he doesn't get it done, he doesn't get it done. Worried about Trubisky in general. Fine for fantasy-ish, but definitely did not break out. QB 25. I got to wear that one for sure. I think there's other guys like even Marcus Mariota could potentially be a backup there and fill that void and be just as good with higher upside, in my opinion.
Oh man, you're still wearing the Marcus badge proudly. I'm pretty much through with Marcus, but we'll see. In any event, yeah, I was just as high on Mitch as you were. So this is kind of a double.
I think a lot of people were. It wasn't a crazy call last year. It just didn't work out. I think everyone was hyped on the Bears, and it just didn't work out. And your boy, or Curly's boy, I should say, Trey Burton, didn't quite get it done. So anyway, unfortunately, the Bears didn't work out. Let's jump over to your side, though. You had kind of a tricky situation with your breakout.
Yeah, Sam Darnold. Again, my thinking was very similar to my thinking on Josh Allen. Second-year quarterbacks, I was all about him. I thought Darnold showed enough, even though he was wildly inconsistent, he showed enough promise as a rookie to make me excited about him heading into this past year. Injury or what he missed a month with mono, I guess.
Yep.
Was an injury. And he had some, in Sam Darnold fashion, he had some genuinely terrible games. But ultimately, he did take a step forward across the board. I think the biggest problem with him is that he just doesn't have enough of a supporting cast.
Yeah.
His receiving core has just been generally lousy. Both Robbie Anderson and Demaryius Thomas are headed to free agency. The Jets are going to have no choice now but to upgrade his supporting cast. I don't know exactly how they're going to do it, but they need to do so. He's 22. He's plenty of upside. He's definitely somebody, if you're joining a dynasty league this year or have been in one, I think he's somebody you can look at as a trade target.
I agree.
Jets can upgrade his supporting cast. I still think there's plenty of things to get excited about. Even if I didn't quite hit the nail on the head this year, I still feel pretty good about him going forward.
I think you're totally right. And two things real quick on Sam Darnold. First of all, he is 22. He's like he's probably 3 years away from his prime.
Yeah.
So
yep.
He gets a real coach. He's going to be just fine. I like Sam Darnold a lot. You and I, of course, we're grew up in California. We're Pac-12 guys at Oregon and Cal Berkeley. So we watch USC closer than maybe other people on the East Coast and whatnot. When he was at USC, bro, crushing it. Big Sam Darnold fan when he got drafted. I thought it was a rough landing spot, but nonetheless, I think he'll be just fine moving forward. We'll jump on to the running backs now. Mine was a crushing win. Not much to say here. Breakout was Aaron Jones, finished as the running back 2 on the season. This was massive. Obviously worked out for Aaron Rodgers. They're looking to extend Aaron Jones. Of course, probably not going to pay him too much for too long. We know the running back game, but he became more of a dual threat running back than I thought he was going to be. Jamal Williams was a factor, but not so much of a factor to take Jones out. He scored a shit ton of touchdowns, which obviously helps in fantasy football. I don't know if that's repeatable, leading the league in touchdowns, but he absolutely blew up. The Packers had a great first year, and with the new regime, I should say. So I expect more next year. I don't think he'll be running back number 2 next year, but I do expect him to be a high level running back going forward. And that was a smash at running back number 2. Unfortunately for you, the next couple of these guys, we had some injury issues, but who do you have at running back?
Yeah.
Second year in a row, I believe you had this pick.
I can't remember what I did the year before, but definitely this year I was all in, and I got to give. So my pick was Darius Geis. I got to give you props to on this one because if I remember correctly, when we did this episode, you were just like, he's not there yet. It's too early. It's kind of like at best it's going to be a Dalvin Cook situation, which he did in his second year, where he came back, was marginally healthy when he was on the field, kind of so. So there's just and you turned out to be totally right. I mean, when he was on the field, Geis was insane. I mean, he averaged 5.8 yards per carry. He showed a little bit of promise in the receiving game. So I still think if by some miracle he can stay healthy, he could be unbelievable. And Dalvin Cook is a lesson that it can happen for young players who have injury issues early on. I definitely have a little bit more uncertainty though going into this year, given that Geis's injuries have been so gnarly and have been all sort of knee related.
Yeah.
It's definitely have a lot of trepidation going in the upcoming year. I think that he could be legitimately one of the best running backs in the league. I think he's unbelievable, actually. But yeah, definitely a lot of injury fear for sure.
Totally. And the Redskins are cursed with injury. We know that. Adrian Peterson's coming back. Bryce Love out of Stanford's waiting in the wings as well. They could bring another running back in if they really wanted to, because AP is no sure thing either. And, you know, I say this with guys a lot too. When they were coming out of the draft, it was kind of a conversation of Darius Guice or Saquon Barkley, you know, and now obviously that's silly. But at the time, it was really kind of a 1-2 situation. So not a terrible call. It just didn't work out, unfortunately, with those injuries. You got to be really careful with those ACL, MCL, PCL knee things, because it's not so much re-injuring the knee, which he did, but it's the hamstrings, it's the quads, it's the calf muscles, it's the Achilles, because these guys are overcompensating and shit, which throws them off.
Yep.
Let's jump into the wide receivers. Both of these, we've already talked. I'm just going to cut yours out really quick to save time.
Please do.
We've already talked about Anthony Miller, who was your breakout. Obviously, we talked about him already. Didn't work out. Mine likewise. Dante Pettis, 49ers, wide receiver 129, not getting it done. He got hurt. He was in the doghouse with Shanahan. Deebo Samuel is a man.
Sure is.
George Kittle remained the dude. I think the Niners had 17 running backs, if I remember correctly.
Who all averaged 5 yards a carry.
Absolutely. So, you know, and it was the Niners were just fine without him. Frankly, they didn't need him. And, you know, Dante Pettis didn't do anything. So, unfortunately, he was out as well. Let's go right to the tight ends. O.J. Howard, another one. Arguably the biggest bust, maybe in fantasy football, at the tight end position, 100%. My first article of the season was on biggest bust at each position, and he was by far my biggest bust at the tight end position. I got a big article of that on our website, TCK Pod. You can check out if you'd like for the biggest bust of the season. But finished at tight end 28. They just didn't use him. He wasn't injured, played really well. He actually had a great downfield yards per catch, yards per target, same thing, athleticism. They just didn't use him. I hope so badly he gets traded to somebody who gives a shit about him, because I still think he's top 5, no question about it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
For sure. His talent is I think among the top that you'll see in the league for tight end. There's just too much of an improvement from Chris Godwin, who took over as a powerhouse. Mike Evans, of course, still there, still good. Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, because I think they could have done a lot more with him in that offense. But we'll see. I like him in fantasy drafts this year, actually, because he's so far down, and I think he's definitely a bet on talent guy. You know, more so than most of the tight ends that you might get at that point of the draft. I think he provides a lot more upside. So I think he could be somebody that could take a step forward. Maybe in his second year with Bruce Arians offense, maybe they utilize him more. It remains to be seen. But I still
ship him off elsewhere, like New England, man. They need a tight end. You know, a lot of teams need a tight end. If he can get a fresh start, I think he could be just fine. We talked about the 2 rookie tight ends that you were behind. We talked about Noah Fant earlier. Here was your other one at your breakout position.
Yep. Yeah. This was I won't say much, because it's basically the same deal. T.J. Hawkinson. This one more function of injuries, but the target share just wasn't there, especially after Matt Stafford went out. You know, again, I like him going forward. I still think he's talented. Hopefully Matt Stafford can be healthy and continue. When Stafford was on the field last year, he was really impressive, actually. I mean, I don't think we said a single word about Matthew Stafford before this.
Nobody ever does.
I mean, nobody ever does, but I mean, especially the year before, he did not look good. But he played
with a broken back.
I mean, the dude literally was playing with a broken back. Yeah, but that was kind of it. I mean, I don't think people thought he was going to bounce back from that, but he did, and he was good. We'll see what happens going forward. But I still like Hawkinson over there. I still like him in that offense. He could do well over there.
I think the Lion.
Matt Patricia largely credited with Gronk. That's the last point I'll make on that. But
I think the Lions could be sneaky if they stay healthy. My boy Marvin Jones Jr. stays healthy. Kenny Golladay led the NFL in receiving touchdowns. Kerryon Johnson, another one of these got-to-stay healthy guys, but massive talent there. Bo Scarborough's at least LeGarrette Blount, who can score some touchdowns. Their defense is getting a little bit better. Matt Stafford, I think, is my favorite late-round QB this year. Dak Prescott was that guy last year. Worked out. I think Matt Stafford's going to be that guy this year. If I fade and fade and fade and fade, I get Matt Stafford in the 13th round, probably every draft, redraft at least, I'll be just fine. Breakouts, I had Trubisky, Aaron Jones, Dante Pettis, O.J. Howard.
Sam Darnold, Darius Geis, Anthony Miller, T.J. Hawkinson.
One more category, my man. Let's wrap this up. We went with our bounce back category. This is, of course, these are guys who were either injured and coming back, or they just had a shitty season for whatever reason. They had a weird coaching change in year one. They were trying to get through it in year two. Nonetheless, these are guys who we thought would have a bounce back campaign in 2019. I'm gonna let you kick this one off here at the quarterback position.
Yeah, in some sense, I take this as a huge win, even though he finished as QB number 10. Carson Wentz was my pick. He set a career high in yards, 4,039 passing yards. I think that should be applauded, if not flat out like bow down and sort of, we're not worthy sort of thing with him, because he didn't have.
We're not worthy. We're not worthy.
He had nobody to throw to. Alshon Jeffrey, gone. Nelson Aguilar, gone. Jordan Howard, gone. Deshaun Jackson, gone. Darren Sproles, gone. All those guys went down. Jordan Howard went down. He had nothing to outside of Zach
Two
Ertz,
tight ends
to throw to, and he still managed to get 4,039 yards. So I'm actually was very impressed with what he did last year. Assuming a clean bill of health going into next year. I definitely think he's another, target him at a similar level, I think, for this upcoming year.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I got into kind of an Instagram chat with this account that had posted up like comeback or whatever, and I'm a little bit worried about it. I actually took the time to break down all of Carson Wentz's seasonal averages, how he's been doing with injuries and whatnot, and basically he's averaged out in his career so far in 4 seasons, basically the QB 15 and a half, 16 on the season. So where he's going to get drafted, I don't want that.
They got to get him some weapons. I think he's shown a lot of talent in his time in the NFL. I just think he's consistently had nobody to throw to outside of Zach Ertz. So he needs some people he needs a supporting cast over there. Much like your quarterback pick for bounce back.
I will say one thing about the Eagles. I think they should bring in Odell Beckham. I think he would love to burn the Giants, and I love me some Dallas Goedert. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Miles Sanders as well. All right, let's move on to mine. Bounce back candidate for the quarterback position. I went with Aaron Rodgers. Severely disappointed in 2018. A lot of that had to do with the Mike McCarthy situation. Guys were injured, whatever. He bounced back QB 11. Not Aaron Rodgers numbers that we know and love for fantasy football, but at this point, with basically one true receiver and a brand new quarterback and a brand new offense and all these things, he did pretty well. And not to mention that Devontae Adams wasn't even healthy the whole season. Aaron Rodgers is just still getting it done. So QB 11, he's another guy that I don't think in fantasy football ever you've been able to say you're going to get value on Aaron Rodgers. He's another dude that like you might be able to get in like the 7th, 8th round, the way quarterbacks are drafted, and why not? You know what I mean? Like, why not grab him and then Matt Stafford later, and I'm sure you'll be just fine. So I went with Aaron Rodgers, I should say. That worked out at the quarterback position. Let's get into the running backs. I'm going to let you save yours because yours is probably the best one of the rest of this category. I went with David Johnson. Again, we're going to go into bold predictions and crazy calls next episode, so I'm going to let Daniel save his take on that. You might be able to tell by body language what he may have said. But what I will say is I thought DJ was going to come back from injury, be just fine. The reality was early in the season he was okay, but he wasn't scoring touchdowns. He wasn't a massive part of that offense. It kind of had a tough time getting going under Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray getting his feet wet in the NFL, all these things. Then all of a sudden, DJ gets kind of hurt. Chase Edmonds comes in. DJ comes back. Everyone starts David Johnson. Chase Edmonds scores 4 touchdowns. Nobody's excited about that. After that, after the bye, they bring in Kenyon Drake. The rest is history. David Johnson probably on his way out of Arizona. Kenyon Drake now a value in maybe not a value, but definitely a seeked-out player in fantasy football. Nonetheless, David Johnson, running back 33, disappointed for sure. And I think the David Johnson of old is behind us, unfortunately.
Yeah, 100% agree. He's definitely not somebody to be excited about next year. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see where he is. And maybe he ends up in a situation in which he can sort of recover some of that value. But definitely unbelievably disappointed. I was really bummed actually, because you'll see what my bold prediction was.
But mine too, man.
Beyond that, I just thought I like David Johnson, and I thought he had a lot left in him. We were both wrong, needless to say.
I would say most people, really quick before you do your take, most people had the big four, so some version of McCaffrey, Saquon, Zeke, and Kamara, whatever, and then most people had David Johnson as 5.
Yeah, totally.
I eventually moved. I think I moved Joe Mixon up at 5, maybe 6. Dalvin Cook was up in there, but then David Johnson was right in there as well, early preseason. We all thought it was coming. I had this big, long take about how explosive he was in 2016 and why not be that good again in this high-powered offense. Yeesh, not so much. Why don't you go ahead for your running back who did have a wonderful season?
Yeah. Mine was a bit more of a winner. Leonard Fournette finished as the running back number 6, and I will say that was despite the fact that he only got into the end zone 3 times the entire year.
Boo.
And that's just a fluky thing. He's almost guaranteed to improve on that number next year, assuming he stays healthy. But the bottom line is he rolled career best 1,152 yards on 265 carries. I think the most important thing about him this upcoming year is his improvement as a receiver. He had 76 catches for 522 yards through the air. So he is shaping up finally as a true dual threat running back. I definitely am all in on them going forward. Obviously, they don't have a whole lot of a passing game to speak of either. So he's going to be, carrying that offense as much as possible next year. I don't necessarily think Raquel Armstead is a threat at this point. I definitely am going to, take the victory on this one. He definitely finally showed, I think, his promise as a running back, as a dual threat running back.
The biggest thing for Leonard Fournette was, could he stay healthy after a couple of years of just not being healthy?
He did,
but being a beast. He did, and he played really well. I took the gamble on him in our league of record, and that obviously worked out. I had a bunch of injuries elsewhere, so my team was terrible, but he was a shining star, which is great. So I like Fournette a lot, and he'll probably be probably a second rounder depending on your league. Standard leagues, he'll be a first rounder, I would think, for sure. But I don't know. Do people play non-PPR anymore? I don't know if that's a. I know of one league because it's my brother's league,
which pisses me off. But you have to change it if you do like a mock on Fantasy Pros. The default is standard leagues. You always have to change it.
It'll fade out. My brother and his homies, his Yucklehead buddies, who I know very well from back in the day. Those guys all still play standard league, and I help my brother out because he works full time. He's got a tough time, but dude, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? Anyway. All right. Basically, if you didn't have Derrick Henry, you lost that league, and that's unfair.
That's true.
All right. So let's get into the wide receivers and the tight ends. No fancy names for the rest of this pod, so we can probably blaze this pretty quickly. I'll go first. Geronimo Allison, a big darling. There was a huge conversation preseason about which wide receiver would be the complement to Devontae Adams, right? And that was Geronimo Allison. That was MVS. I know you and I both were on MVS and Geronimo Allison. If you didn't get one in drafts, you would reach to get the other kind of a thing. I went with Geronimo on this one. Wide receiver 88 did not bounce back. I still think he's got promise, a big body, still has Aaron Rodgers as long as he's in Green Bay, but didn't happen this year, unfortunately. So that was a bust for sure. Did not bounce back. Wide receiver 88. On your side, okay.
Yeah, I guess. About Geronimo Allison, it's true. I mean, he was healthy the whole year, too. He played basically every game. He just wasn't.
Which is bad news.
That just tells you he's not somebody you should be into next year. Jamison Crowder, interesting case. I mean, he was kind of so-so, right? I mean, he didn't have first of all, he played. I will say he played every game, which is cool considering how hurt he was the previous year. And he did okay, finished with 833 yards, 6 touchdowns. Again, that offense was kind of a mess broadly. I still actually think highly of Jamison Crowder. And I will say, both Robbie Anderson, like I said before when I was talking about Darnold, both Robbie Anderson and Demaryius Thomas free agents this year. Crowder potentially has a chance to be a significant part of that offense next year. Mm-hmm. Especially if we see some non-kissing disease strides with Sam Darnold, I think he could be in for another improvement, assuming he stays healthy. we'll see. I mean, definitely not somebody you should be targeting as like one of your top tier wide receivers, but in terms of the middle to late-ish middle rounds of drafts, I think you could do a lot worse than Crowder.
Absolutely. I totally agree. We're going to save the best for last, so I'm going to go first on this one with the tight end. Jack Doyle, tight end 15. This is interesting here. I did think he was going to bounce back because Eric Ebron scored 13 receiving touchdowns, also accidentally ran one in for 14. He was second in the league in 2017, or 2018, I should say. I just felt like Ebron was going to fall down, therefore Doyle was going to go up. Now, of course, we should have maybe if we had a Colt in this. This is obviously before Andrew Luck had retired. So I thought there was going to be a little more juice with Jack Doyle, but honestly, I think in like somewhat limited play, I think that Jack Doyle actually did well at tight end 15. They're already saying they're going to get rid of Ebron. So if Jack Doyle's the only option, I think he's going to be back up into at least tight end 1, top 12 tight end for sure, maybe even higher. So he's got the ability, and he's a big body, one of the rare big bodies that the Colts actually have. So I do like Jack Doyle again for 2020, but he's just not super flashy, not a lot of big plays, more of a PPR guy. So that was kind of a middle range thing with him finishing tight end 15. Man, I'm kind of joking, but this is actually super sad.
Yeah.
This whole situation. So well, I'll let you preface it, and I'll take over from there.
Yeah, so I took Jordan Reed as and I'm sad to end on this note because I love Jordan Reed. Actually, I think it's easy to forget that he was early in his career. He looked like he was going to be one of the best tight ends of the decade, legitimately. And beyond the head issues and the constant concussions, all sorts of injuries has just completely ravaged his career. Never appeared in more than 14 games, cleared 12 just twice in 7 years. And of course, as I assume most people know, released by Washington now in this offseason. Apparently wants to continue his playing career. Somebody may be willing to give a bet on him for a tiny contract. But yeah, just super sad. I mean, my thinking was that, look, Washington doesn't have exactly a modicum of weapons to throw to. He had, just in general, when he has been on the field, he's generally been useful, if not spectacular. And tight end was a relatively thin position, as always. So my thinking was, at the end of a draft, I thought you could do worse than Jordan Reed. But what can I say? I mean, the dude is, regardless of what he thinks he's still able to do, he certainly seems donezo. But it's sad. Like I said, it's easy to remember. First of all, he's not that old. He's still under 30, I think, or at least around 30 now. And like I said, looked to be on a trajectory that was going to put him as one of the top tight ends of his era. And just didn't happen. Unfortunately, body did not agree.
Yeah, it was a bummer. He got hurt very early in the season, got a concussion. He was basically out for the year, essentially. And here we are, early spring. We're dropping this episode early March, and he literally just cleared the concussion protocol.
Yeah, it's crazy. 6
months later. Dude, at some level, like Brandon Cooks is one of these guys now, where like after a while, some official has to just say, look, bro, sorry. Like, for your livelihood, we're not allowing you to play football.
Right.
There's a whole nother conversation we don't need to get into at the end of the podcast. But if the NFL wants to save face on this concussion discussion that we've had in CTE and this Aaron Hernandez shit that's just come out and everything else, this is the opportunity for them to get in front of this and just shut this kid down. And like, he and Kirk Cousins were one of the best pairings for 3 to 4 years. I agree with you. But it's not the case anymore. And unlike Tyler Eifert, who's had an awesome career completely destroyed by injuries, this is in the head, right? You only get one brain, unfortunately.
Yep.
So
it turns out you need that, and you need it for the rest of your life, regardless of what you do with it. And so it's I agree 100%.
All right, bounce backs. I had Aaron Rodgers, David Johnson, Geronimo Allison, and Jack Doyle.
I had Carson Wentz, Leonard Fournette, Jamison Crowder, and Jordan Reed.
Yo, that was a lot of fun, man. Sleepers, busts, breakouts, bounce backs, 2019 predictions recap episode. On Thursday's episode, we are going to go through a couple more categories. We're going to do our gamers from last year, will not draft players, and then we're going to get into some fun, bold predictions and crazy calls, let you know how those ended up. As always, thank you for checking into the TCK Pod, the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Podcast. Make sure to subscribe, smash that like button, and give us a comment here on the YouTube channel. And if you're listening wherever you're listening, please leave a rate and review for the podcast. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at fantasyfootball_TCK pod, on Twitter at TCK_pod, Facebook at the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Podcast, and we will catch you next time. Daniel, always a pleasure, never a chore, my man. Thank you so much.
It's been real, man. Looking forward to being back.